Well, here it is, everybody. The next stage in the April 2022 America tour, USS New Jersey. Now, of course, this technically should have come out in December because I am trying to stick to one upload from the tour per month. Unfortunately, that didn't happen for a number of different reasons. A few time-sensitive videos needed to be made and released, so apologies for that, but hey, you're getting it at the start of January, so we're not too far off. And of course, this wonderful ship was where I remained for a couple of days, about a third of the way through the trip, I think, and a very welcome sight it was on this wonderful morning, although there was a brief storm towards the end of the first day. Now, a couple of quick notes before we go on. If you've seen the USS Olympia video, you will have seen some of the radio interference that I was getting on my radio mic. And upon review of the video footage I shot aboard the New Jersey, it's become very, very evident that whatever the source of the interference was, it is definitely an external source of interference. It's not to do with my equipment. You will be able to see in some of the shots I'm not moving at all, and yet the interference cuts in. And also the interference was much, much worse aboard the New Jersey as long as we were external to the ship. As soon as we went into the ship behind, up to 12 inches of steel, suddenly all the interference disappeared and everything worked perfectly fine, no matter how much I moved around. So that tells me two things. One, it wasn't an equipment fault of mine, and two, whatever the interference source is, it's on this side of the river rather than over at Olympia, because we're near enough directly opposite, but things got much worse over on this side of things. But in any case, I've learned, and obviously I will be overdubbing those sections. Apart from anything, it's not, a few seconds here or there. It's actually huge chunks of it completely gone. The other thing is that we'll only be covering, obviously, a limited portion of New Jersey, in part because my standing policy, I don't want to just do an incomplete video tour of the ship. For one thing, especially on a ship like New Jersey, this video would be 3-4 hours long at least. And for two, I want to give you a good taste of what's there, but if you want the whole experience, then please, if you can, go and visit New Jersey when she's open, obviously. There was one other issue, which was completely beyond any of our control, which is we had a bunch of extra stuff planned, but on the day that I arrived at USS New Jersey, USS The Sullivans up in Buffalo, New York, managed to keel over and sink, which of course meant Ryan, as one of the best known museum curators in the US as far as museum ships go, was in very high demand by the media. So those of you who were keeping track of the tour will have seen that Ryan and myself did a kind of a mini press conference, if you like, on the Battleship New Jersey channel on the day of that sinking. But, therefore, despite the fact I was there for a couple of days, we only got to tour parts of the ship. I say only. As you'll see, we got to tour some pretty nice parts of the ship. Anyway, with all that said, let's get on with looking aboard USS New Jersey. Now, as with my standard working theory aboard museum ships, that it's easier to start your way right up top and then work your way down through the ship, we headed up. But on the way up, we came across this little thing, so we thought we should use it to check if USS Olympia was still there from the day before. And indeed, as you can see, she still was. Now, this isn't actually what the sight through it looks like. This is what it looks like if you're holding the camera just a fraction away from the lens cover, which if you've got a DSLR, that's pretty much what you have to do. But then I remembered I have my phone, and the phone's lens can go right up onto the lens like your eye does. And that resolved into, well, with a little bit of misalignment, this little picture. So you can see even from a very basic and relatively small bit of optics aboard the New Jersey, there's some pretty high quality lenses and mirrors going on here. And so it was time to head up to the top of the ship's superstructure. Now, yes, I know technically that radar platform would be even higher. However, for safety reasons, it wasn't possible for me to just wander on up there. Nonetheless. So, hello. We are starting at the top. So the only way is down. Pretty much the highest point you can get on USS New Jersey without going up into the fire control director just above me. Hello, overdubbing Drac here. Yes, as I was saying, or the radar mast just behind the main superstructure, which is of course something of a later addition to the ship because if you look at photos of New Jersey from World War II, that's not what she actually has. This is a part of her rebuilds during the Cold War period. Nonetheless, as I was saying at the time, we're standing on a platform that was also part of the Cold War extension. So there was a gangway walk around, but as you can see here, the various joints in the plating indicate how this observation platform just below the main fire control director and rangefinder, at least as far as optical stuff is concerned, was extended a couple of times whilst New Jersey was going through her various refits, bearing in mind that New Jersey was one of the more reactivated of the Iowa class, and there's some of her Cold War equipment also actually here, right in this box, whatever this happens to be. I believe when I was actually recording this, I knew what it was, but...
And you might be wondering, well, Drac, that seems an awfully specific amount of information that you know, considering that this is an American battleship and you aren't American last time I checked, hat notwithstanding. So...
Yes, I had been cheating just a little bit. I'm just looking over there at a very annoying helicopter, which you'll see in a minute. But spoiler alert, I wasn't alone up here. You may recognise some of those wonderful people from the Battleship New Jersey channel. So cameraman back on point. So the tall one, as you might recognise, is of course Ryan Samansky, curator of the Battleship New Jersey Museum. And there's the annoying helicopter.
I do dearly hope that guy's going away.
The helicopter refueling platform from
right.
the area is right across.
Fair enough. So...
Now, of course, I have just introduced Ryan, and most of you probably know who he is already.
And the other staff with him, so we have the behind-the-camera woman, Ryan's corresponding other half as curator.
That's Elena Noland, the other curator of the ship. And at this point I realised, obviously, I hadn't given anybody else a microphone, so trying to get them to respond in this wind condition wasn't particularly great. But anyway...
Jennifer, social media and marketing.
And of course, unlike me, as far as I can tell, none of them happen to suffer from vertigo, which will be important.
That's they're showing us around, which is absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, guys. And let's go.
So on our way down, as you can see, we went into the conning tower, where I was able to open and then close the door, Ryan helping just lock it off there. But, well, this door is incredibly heavy, but with the help of that little rotational lever, one person can open or indeed close it. So there's me inside. Also, now, we did also get a chance to go into the funnel cap. However, what you probably can't see from this point is that although there is a guarded little walkway, relatively narrow, that runs along the side of the funnel cap, to get into it, you have to go up and over this little ladder, which for some reason is outside the walkway. The walkway doesn't end with it, with a guardrail around it. The walkway ends, and then you have to go up over the guardrail and onto this little ladder, which is above a rather long drop, which consists of the bulk of the aft funnel. And unfortunately, although Ryan, who was ahead of me, was obviously perfectly happy to go in there, as long-term viewers will know, I do happen to suffer from vertigo on occasion, and this time I made the mistake of looking down to see what might happen if I let go, and it was a relatively windy day. And, well, as soon as that happened, my mind just went, nope, you are not stepping over this guardrail. So, unfortunately, that's all you're going to see of the funnel cap, at least this time. I am training myself to get better, so hopefully, maybe later this year, I will be able to overcome that. Nonetheless, we headed on down, and this is one of the forward views from one of the platforms going down the superstructure, somewhat obscured by this slightly later model radar that gets in the way, but you can see the top of the conning tower there, which, as you've seen in the video, we had a bit of a go at on our way up. But of course that conning tower is also surrounded by bridge superstructure, so if you've ever wondered what the view out the front of an Iowa class battleship looks like if you're standing just in front of the conning tower, well, this is what it looks like. It's a pretty awesome sight. You can see there the turret number painted on top. And of course, having been in and out of service throughout the Cold War period, New Jersey, as with all the other Iowas, is scattered with evidence of some of those refits. So you would have seen from the funnel incident the Tomahawk and Harpoon launchers and the CRWS systems that are just aft of that area. And this, which you also see on your way down, you can see is some of, I believe these are the chaff decoy launchers that were installed in the 1980s just above one of the 5-inch mounts on the port side. And really, the lines of the ship do make for some absolutely wonderful views when you're looking down from on high. So there's that offending later edition radar unit we saw earlier, and you can see here how the conning tower itself protrudes from the superstructure that makes up the forward part of the ship's bridge area. But despite all the refits, if you look to the right, you can see some of the evidence of what was removed following the Second World War, that kind of rust red circular impression that also has the build out of the platform at that level, shows where one of the ship's lighter anti-aircraft weapons was originally mounted. Of course, during this time when I was there, they were undergoing the redecking of the USS New Jersey, which may or may not be complete at this point, but that includes obviously resurfacing and repainting some of the non-teak decked areas as well, because they're all exposed to the weather. So heading on down out of the superstructure and onto the ship's bow, this is where I started talking a bit about the Iowa class's seakeeping, which is something that's come up on the channel a fair bit. But of course, it's much easier to show people what it's like rather than just explain it in the abstract. And
well, it have some issues, but let's just say the designers weren't negligent in putting the ships together. They did try their best. So for one thing,
when you look over the bow of the ship, you discover that is in fact an incredibly long way down. So if you're going through heavy seas, well, they have to be some pretty heavy seas to reach all the way up here. Although, of course, as many photos show, that was still entirely possible. And if you look aft, you can see that the bow actually slopes back down towards the main gun battery, which is a useful seakeeping feature because, of course, the US Navy, unlike the Royal Navy at the time that the Iowas were laid down, was not wedded to the idea of firing its guns dead level forward, as you find on the King George V. So whilst the Iowa class's bows are quite narrow, they're not as bad as they would have been if they'd had this same kind of narrow profile but followed British design practice and had the deck completely level. You can also see in this area, if you look down, this kind of Christmas tree style antenna, which is of course again a post-World War II refitted object. And, well, it provides a lot of opportunities for decoration for the ships during various periods. Personally, I think it's ugly as sin and ruins the ship's lines. But, of course, you know, given the focus of the channel, I'm a bit more of a World War II aficionado and fully understand, you know, they're not going to be taking it off anytime soon because, well, it's part of the history of the ship. The other thing you can see, which the camera's just showing there, is how you can see the hull kind of curving in and then extends in a very long kind of nose forwards. Bearing in mind how the Iowas did draw a lot on the South Dakotas.
You can almost imagine if this was a South Dakota class, how the bow would just follow that initial curved line and end much sooner.
Whereas for a better length to beam ratio, you do need this kind of, if you like, bow extension on the Iowas in order to get the greater speed, even if that comes at the expense of some seakeeping because the bow is negatively buoyant. Now, heading slightly further back, you come across this 50 cal Browning machine gun. Then we're still on the bow on the starboard side. Now, of course, the 50 cal was present on a lot of US Navy battleships back in the 1930s.
But they were very rapidly supplanted with 20mm Oerlikons. They were originally supposed to be replaced by the 1.1 inch, but you know, the less said about that, the better. And then, of course, 20mm and 40mm became the standard US light and medium anti-aircraft armament. The Iowas, coming into service towards the end of World War II, were never equipped with anti-aircraft 50 cal Brownings because, as I said, they were basically obsolete by that point. So why is there a 50 cal here? Well, the funny thing is, of course, the 50 cal predates the Iowas, and when they were brought back in the 1980s, the Browning had a new lease in life, not as an anti-aircraft weapon, obviously, but because by that point the risks to the ship were not just aircraft, other ships as well, which obviously you've got the 16-inch guns for that, but you have small craft, as in speedboats, that kind of thing, maybe the odd person trying to board, and for that, by the 1980s, the 40mm were pretty much gone. The 5-inch can only depress so far. So a 5-inch gun can depress to engage targets at fairly close range, but if you've got a very, very low freeboard target like a speedboat or something, and it's within a couple of hundred yards, the 5-inch can't depress that low, whereas these things, if the mount was allowed its full range of travel, actually could. So these were actually installed as effectively point defense weapons, which is somewhat amusing considering that point defense caliber weapons of approximately this caliber were also a thing back when the very first torpedo boats came about in the 1880s and 1890s, which would have equipped ships like Olympia, which is of course just over the river. You've got single and full auto fire here. Of course, although they've got some rounds loaded, it doesn't actually matter. But for kids, like obviously myself, there's a speaker there, so you can pretend, if you want to pretend to be shooting up the waterfront. I don't know.
Now you can see the Browning is right behind us, but this is in fact the site
Of one of two 40mm gun nests that were positioned on the bow of the ship. So you can see the actual 40mm mount would have been here, and
the total area covered by the mounting, of course, extends up to this circle. So in the centre, that's where the actual pedestal, if you like, to allow it to rotate would be. And you'll see that a little bit later on when we go aft, when there is actually one that I think they brought back aboard that's on the port side aft quarter. And you can see that we're not too far away from the bow, and with the habit of the bow throwing up a lot of spray in heavy weather, you'd have spray coming over you. And of course you've got the main 16-inch guns right behind you. So I have a feeling whoever was given this particular duty station had probably drawn the short straw, because if the ship is under anti-aircraft alert and the ship's steaming at high speed in anything but a flat calm, you're probably going to be getting an awful lot of salt spray to the face. And if the main guns are called into action, well, you can tell exactly where those barrels are. This would not have been a fun place to be. So, yeah, if the ship suddenly finds itself engaging in the surface action, one, you have to hope that they're not going to be shooting anything ahead of the ship, and two, you probably have to make tracks for somewhere that's a bit sheltered, although that would mean that usually you'd have to get out of the gun nest and run back past both of the forward gun turrets, which I can't imagine would be something that would be particularly easy on the nerves if you know what's about to happen. But you may rejoice, because now we're going to find ourselves going inside the ship, and magically, just like that, as soon as we're inside some good quality armour steel, or at least some SDS steel, in some cases in the upper parts of the hull, it suddenly turns out all that radio interference goes away. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed what this is. This is, yes, part of the loading mechanism for a 5-inch 38 gun. So let's go and have a look at what the interior of one of the 5-inch 38 mounts looks like.
So here we are in, well, as you might guess, not a 16-inch turret. This is one of the 5-inch twin mounts. So this is mount 5.5. And this shows you the business end of the ship's heavy anti-aircraft - secondary anti-surface weaponry. So we have two guns, the back end of each one here, and in front of me here we have the hoists. So you've got 5-inch shells coming up. The reason they're point down is that down here this is a fuse setting hoist. So the fire control computers will actually demonstrate to you what is going up. So the fire control computers will actually send through to this gun system what the fuse setting on these shells needs to be. Now obviously if you're using the VT fuses, which are very poorly named, but they're radar proximity fuses, this is not so much of an issue, they just need to be armed. But if you're actually using timed fuses, which is what was in use earlier in the war, then the fire control system would send through, right, you need a fuse setting of, let's say, 2 seconds. That will be set as the shell comes up. The shell will be picked out of here when this opens, and it would be moved into here. Now you can see all these little dinks and dents. This shows where these shells have been chucked in, because remember this is an all-angle loading system, can load up to 85 degrees, gun can fire up to 85 degrees, so this would be a relatively easy thing. You chuck it in, you've got a little runner here to help, land somewhere in there, that goes down, gun gets rammed in, off it goes. And you see here, this is the casing for the propellant. So the propellant and the shell are separate, so this is a two-part ammunition. That's to improve the speed of handling, and again obviously you've got little marks here where that's come down. This is the rammer, so once the propellant is in, the shell is in, the rammer is shoving the shell all the way into the breech. The rammer then pops up along this and then comes back down this side, and it's all mirror imaged over here. And so you might be thinking, well, hang on, so you've got two hoists, each hoist is bringing up shells alternately. So where's the powder coming up? Powder's coming up out of these things. So you can see here, here's another powder charge come up, and you see this has a wooden plug in it. So the shells and the charges are not being crimped together to form a single piece of ammunition before it's fired. They are literally just sitting one on top of the other, pretty much the same way that the 16-inch shells are sitting on top of the bag charges, although obviously with these metal cased charges it's somewhat more secure. So you can see the back of me in this rather cramped space, because you might be wondering, so how do these guns actually fire? Well, normally the job of the gun crews would just be to feed shells, because the firing, aiming, etc. is all being taken place from one of the directors. But if all of that falls apart and you're back to local control, this is where you would sit very uncomfortably, I might add. This is not designed for someone my height. I have a manual foot pedal down my right foot by which I can fire the guns. I've got a little tracking system showing my elevation in minutes. Follow the pointer, so if some form of director is still functioning, I can just follow the pointer to aim the guns. If it's not, then I've got various levers here to manually adjust the guns myself, and I've got a little sight which I can look through, because obviously this is all plated up so I can't actually see what's going on outside. So that sight is what I need to see the targets that I'm shooting at, and I've got various dials here. I've got clear, polarized if it's just really sunny, red or yellow.
In New Jersey, all guests and crew members are asked to help maintain Battleship New Jersey's heating and air conditioning batteries by closing all doors behind them when entering and exiting the ship, and closing any exterior doors left open when traveling about the ship.
Okay, still going?
Yep.
So the other thing you've got to note is that you can't just jump in here and start firing the guns yourself. There is in fact a dial here, which we'll show in a photo once I've got out of here, which has auto, local, hand and manual settings. And you'd obviously have to set, if you're really, really in a bad way, you'd have it on manual. Normally it would be set to auto, and then you've got the local control and hand control if necessary, if things have gone somewhat wrong but not entirely wrong, as well as all the other various dials and buttons you need to make this thing function. But I can't imagine this will be a very comfortable space for anyone to remain for any particular length of time. Right, we're now in the port side aft 5-inch magazine. Quite high in the ship, but we are under the main armour deck. Over here would originally have been the powder magazine. Now this 5-inch mount has been taken out in later refits. There's currently a set of Tomahawk missile launchers sitting above us, which is why there's no 5-inch mounts, 5-inch powder charges in here. This is just general storage of all sorts of weird and wonderful things. Now this is where the shells would have been stored, and originally for the aftmost 5-inch portside mount, the hoists would have come up here through these holes, but instead you have these boxes here. So we've got a line there which is coolant air conditioning, and then we've got another one here which is loads of wiring. So basically they've taken the hoist out, but they've used the space that was left by the hoists to run systems up for the missiles. But if we come forward to where the next 5-inch gun is, the 5-inch mount, which by this point in the video you've probably seen being fired. These are two hoists which are still in place. Now these are very, very clever hoists, because you don't, although these will take the 5-inch shells and their charges up to the guns, you don't need a specific hoist for the 5-inch gun. This is a kind of universal hoist, and this will take anything from 3-inch shell all the way up to a 6-inch shell It's got an adjustable clamp inside and adjustable feet. So it doesn't matter what you're feeding, you just pop it in, it will accept it and run it up. And this is one of the less appreciated aspects of how you build an awful lot of ships of an awful lot of different shapes and sizes with an awful lot of different armaments very, very quickly. Because instead of having to manufacture a hoist for 3-inch guns on destroyer escorts and 4-inch guns on other small destroyers, and one for 5-inch guns, and one for 6-inch guns as you might find on the cruisers, you could instead just mass manufacture these in a huge production line, or several production lines, and it didn't really matter which ships they ended up on. So as I said, you could find a hoist like this on a destroyer escort, a fleet destroyer, a cruiser, heavy cruiser or light cruiser. Obviously you can't use these for the 8-inch guns, but you would still be able to use them for the 5-inch secondaries. And of course you can find them on an Iowa class battleship feeding the 5-inch secondaries here. So definitely something rather underappreciated. And as you can see, this one, the 5-inch ammunition hoist, this was tested pretty much here, Philadelphia Navy Shipyard, back in 1968. So this has been post-war tested. Still has a lot of World War I era firing controls, etc. though. So this is where all that lovely anti-aircraft ammunition would be being sent up to the guns.
And if you get to the right area, underneath one of the 5-inch 38 mounts, you can see this, which is part of the system that allows the mount to rotate. So yes, it is a quite simple cog and tooth track system, but you know, it works. So don't knock it, and it's very reliable as well. As you can see, it's greased up, and you know, if someone was willing to put the correct voltage and everything through it, it could probably still go, albeit that given that US ships of this period run on 440 volts, there are a few issues with running these systems internally. This is why most museum ships, especially in the US, have to be hooked up to external power, because it turns out various health and safety people start running around screaming when you mention running on a 440 volt internal power system that people might poke. Now, poking of power systems aside, myself and the cameraman got aboard this, which is, as I mentioned earlier, one of the quadruple 40mm Bovers mounts that I think has been brought back. This is on, as I said, the aft port quarter, and, well, it's not powered. So we had to have a go at trying to hand crank the thing. And the reason I'm completely narrating this section is because whatever the audio radio interference up front was, at the back, I think there's about 2 seconds of usable audio in this entire segment. So I've just deleted the whole thing. You see my legs there sticking out what is actually the right hand side of the mount, although it's the left hand side for you viewers, because of course you have one of these sections which controls the elevation, and the other bit spins the mount around. So we're just making preparations to have a go. You've seen us adjusting it a little bit already, and if the systems fail for whatever reason, whether it be battle damage or whatever, then if you're part of the gun crew, then you're going to have to be doing it this way. And I can assure you it's nowhere near as quick as you might otherwise think. Because remember, you've got to have people shooting the guns behind you. But here we go. So we're spinning like mad. And well, at long to medium ranges, this might be enough to get the gun around pointing in the vague direction of a 0, but it really, really isn't going to be good enough in any way, shape or form in order to actually track an incoming Japanese aircraft at close range, which is of course where most of these guns work would need to be done. So Elliot there, as you can see, is cranking the handles that are elevating or now depressing the gun, and I'm the one over on the right hand side who is going at what I think is a reasonable pace, and you saw I was going a little bit more enthusiastically going the other way, but well, to get something this weight turning using just hand crank power is not really the easiest thing when you've just got one person powering it. So there has to be a huge reduction gear going on, and that of course means you can spin it as fast as you possibly like, but as you saw, the rotation speed is not exactly mind-blowing. So this is why you really hope the maintenance has been done on keeping this mount powered, and you really also hope that battle damage doesn't make you slow down. And of course I'm kind of reflecting all of this, blissfully unaware that the radio mic isn't working. Now, of course, that's all the small scale stuff, but what about the real business end of the New Jersey? What about the 16-inch guns?
So here we are in turret 2. This is the super firing turret forward, and we are in the center gun section. So if you've been on Salem or other cruisers, you're used to maybe the entire turret being open. Not the case, at least on American battleships of the 1930s and 1940s. This is an enclosed section, so this is the, as I said, the center gun, and there'll be a similar chamber for the left-hand gun, similar chamber for the right-hand gun, and then the command and control position for the turret behind us through this hatch. Now, at the moment, you can see a shell has come up from the shell room below. It's ready to go. This is the loading rack, but as you can see, the gun itself is currently elevated at about 15 degrees. So there is no way when this thing drops, roughly speaking horizontal, up to 5 degrees, that it's actually going to load. And this is one of the things that sometimes people don't appreciate about battleships. Different battleships have different maximum loading angles, but even in late World War II, there's basically no battleship that has actual practical all-angle loading the way that cruisers and destroyers by this point have managed to pull off. And so let's say this gun's firing at 15 degrees, so it's probably engaging a target relatively close range. You're probably talking 15 to 20,000 yards, depending on what kind of shell you're using. Then the gun will return to a 5-degree inclination, and then this will drop down, which will allow the shell to be loaded, because of course you want the shell to be loaded first, and then the charges will come out, and then the charges will go in with the rammer as well. So you can see just how big the gun pit is down there. That little platform with the red striping on the right would be almost pretty much up to here at loading time. So it's quite the impressive bit of kit, and there's obviously so many little bits of operating equipment here. You've got a phone, so you can let people know what's going on in case something horrible's going on. You've got lights showing the various stages of loading, showing what stage the gun is at in terms of preparation and what it should be at. And although it's not up here, there is down here on the bulkhead a red line, which is your recoil line. So that's as far back as the gun will actually come when it fires. So in theory, you could be standing exactly where I'm standing, and that 16-inch 50 caliber gun can fire, send a shell weighing about as much as a medium-sized car, miles and miles and miles down range, and all that will happen is it will move about 6 foot back, maybe just clip the tip of my boot, and then it's all good. But if I was to put my boot an inch forward, well, I didn't like that inch of my boot anyway, because no bit of human is stopping that thing coming back. So let's move on to another part of the ship's fire systems. Okay, so here we are inside the shell room, or one of the shell handling rooms aboard USS New Jersey. So you can see there's plenty of Mark 8 shells ready to be sent downrange on the hoists. But of course, you need to load more as you use up the ones that are immediately adjacent to the hoist. The turret can rotate, but why go through the expense of the turret rotating when you can just bring a new one to the loading area? You know, for all their supposed super heaviness, these Mark 8 shells don't really seem to be all that heavy. No, seriously, this one's a replica. Iron brew gives you strength. It does not give you that much strength at all. But you can see here the system of parbuckling. So this is how you actually move a full weight shell around. So you've got ropes around here, ropes, pulleys, and the idea is the rope will engage at the bottom. And as you can see here, the deck is just steel. There'd be a bit of grease here as well, so you probably want to be holding on to the rafters above, because it will be an unforgiving mistress if you flip over and smack your head. And you can basically just rotate the shells like so to get them to the hoists. So this is one of 2 levels on the ship that do this. And then we have the charges, which we will go and have a look at in a minute. So here we are in turret 2's powder handling area. Now you can see here, these are 6 charges, kind of like you've probably seen by now on the Massachusetts on a South Dakota class. So you need all 6 of these charges to make up a full charge to send a shell downrange. And they're loaded in 2 batches of 3. They'd go up in 2 batches of 3. They'd be loaded in 2 batches of 3. But unlike the South Dakotas, which use 90-pound bags, these ones are 110-pound bags because, of course, they've got to go and fire a super heavy shell through a 50 caliber weapon, so you need a little bit more oomph than otherwise. But as you can see, compared to the shell levels, this is almost a cathedral-like space. And over here, we have one of several interlocks, which is how the charges get into here from the magazines. It's because obviously these hoists go straight up to the turret, so if the turret was to experience a hit and flash and blast maybe overcame the protections that are in the hoists, and you've now got flash here, you don't want that getting to the magazines. You know, just ask several ships at the Battle of Jutland about that. And so the flash would have to propagate through at least one other set of safety interlocks. So this is a charge, and so now that's open on the other side. It's flash tight, and when somebody puts one in there, then there will be a signal. You can see I've got a signal that tells me what's going on. And then that means I know freshly delivered 1/6 of a full charge. Here we are in one of the powder magazines, and one of the things you'll notice is that, as with any powder magazine, there's nothing here that can strike sparks. So the deck is nice and rubberized and gripped. Almost everything is painted. These supports are aluminium, or as the Americans would say, aluminum, because that doesn't strike sparks. And of course, we have a nice bronze or brass rail to carry the powder down. Now, if you've seen the video in Massachusetts, you'll have seen that each of these canisters contains 3 charges, and you might think, well, how do you get those out? Because if each of those weighs 110 pounds, you're not exactly tipping that up to get them out. Well, that's what this thing is for. So you would hook it in like so, and then you can pull it out. Obviously, this is on a rail, so it's just going to move around, but you can see that actually it's not that difficult to move a 110-pound charge around with one of these things. And obviously in the canister you'd have to put it in and rotate, and you can actually see how this has been used, because it's got slightly more wear on that side. So whoever's been using this a lot is obviously sticking it in and rotating it clockwise, as opposed to me as a left-hander will probably do it counterclockwise, but that's why there's not that many of us. And when it's not needed, it stores in here. Now, the big question is, can I bear hug one of these, and B, can I do it without crushing the lavalier mic that I'm wearing? So let's find out, because obviously this is 20 pounds more than the 1645 charge. And the answer is yes, just about. I can't imagine it'd be fun humping these things around all the time to load, but it is possible. And then obviously these would be run out. We're in turret 1's shell handling chamber, so they run out to these trays, goes into there when that's open, and you'll have seen already the other side of that to get it into the handling chamber.
Now, of course, having 9 of some of the most powerful guns ever fitted to a battleship, and all the requisite ammunition and charges and all the systems to get those to the guns, is useless unless you know how to get those shells to hit the thing at the other end. And that's where this fire control system comes in. Now, we're going to have a look at this briefly, but later in this year, when this video goes up, we're going to have a much more extensive look at it. So this is a very quick primer.
Okay, so this is the world's only remaining functional Mark 8 fire control computer, and as you can see, it's currently working its way through a solution. So if I dial the target speed down to 10 knots using this little handle here, the target bearing is gradually changing, and you can see, although now there's no further input, it is constantly working to adjust its firing solution. So this gives you an idea of just how complex an electromechanical device this is, because this is only one small part of the gearing. Bearing in mind this entire thing is basically packed full of motors and gears. So, and that's only by changing the target speed, which is this dial. So look at how many other dials we've got, how many other values we can set. 19 separate variables that we can use. And that will then, in theory, tell us how to hit our target, and then all of this information will be sent up to the guns. The guns will train out, off go the shells, and then if there's any corrections that need to be made, then those will be made and a new solution will be generated. Of course, when this is first being used, it can take inputs from either optical fire control directors or the radar, but as the radar gets better and better, it's pretty much only going to be taking inputs from the radar, with optical as a pure backup, just in case something goes horribly wrong with the 15 different radars stuck up on the ship. So once you have your theoretical firing solution come out of the computer, we move over to this. This is the firing table. So we have several keys over this side. So the first thing you would do is let everybody on the ship know that you're going to fire a salvo. So you do that by pulling the salvo signal key 3 times. Now normally you would then go automatic firing key, and that is something that allows you to, you hold it down, and then as the guns pass through the correct azimuth, it would automatically fire. Of course, the guns aren't actually loaded, they're not trained out at the moment, so you can just bypass that all with the hand firing key, which is your manual override. So let's pull the manual override. Oh well, Camden wasn't particularly valuable anyway. And now, so this has told us how fast the shells have left the gun, and we're waiting for one other thing, which is, of course, as we're speaking, those 60-minute shells are in flight. They're getting higher and higher, and gradually, they have now landed. So that gives you some idea of how long the flight time is for those shells, even though the guns are only about 15 degrees elevation at the moment. So if you were firing a gun at a target quite a way away, 30, 35,000 yards, you could quite literally be sitting here having a decent conversation before the shells that you've fired land. And then, of course, if they've hit the target, fantastic, repeat that process. If they haven't hit the target, then you have to come back to here and put in the corrected values, generate a new solution, and then it's back to firing again.
So, great, fantastic. That's a very brief look at all of 3 of the ship's primary weapon systems, at least as far as they were in World War II, and how those weapon systems are actually getting those shells to the targets. But of course, what happens if the enemy fires back, which is relatively likely. The enemy is not likely to just roll over and let you blow them out of the water, much as that would be very convenient. Now, that means, of course, the ship has to be protected by armour. But where is that armour? Well, let's find out.
So, you join us in the void. No, literally, this is actually a void space. So this is just outside of the 5-inch magazines. And as you might guess, if we are under the armour deck, and you know roughly where the 5-inch guns are on an Iowa-class battleship out on the sides, there's not a lot left of the ship if you head further out, and which is what we've done. So this side, on the other side of this armour, well, this steel plating would be the 5-inch guns. This is a void space. And if we look here, what, you ask, might be secured by bolt heads so big? Well, the clue is when you look on the outside of the New Jersey, unlike Salem and unlike a good chunk of other preserved World War I and World War II era warships, there's no obvious bulge of armour, because on the Iowa class and several other US battleships, the armour is internal. So there's outer hull plating, and then there'll be a further void space between the outer hull plating and the other side of this, and this is in fact the angled 12 and a fraction inch thick Class A belt armour that protects the Iowa class battleships from incoming fire. So you can see well, these beams are angled as slightly more than the armour itself is, but you can see from the joins how closely aligned it is. Now obviously the armour plate is not welded to these beams. This is a bit of paint falling off, but this is the underlying plating to which the armour is attached via the massive bolt heads. And this is why, this void space that we're standing in, this is why when you get that perennial question, why not use a high explosive anti-tanker heat or a HESH warhead in a shell, because that's going to have loads of great penetration? Well, yes, it will, but if you use those on something like, say, a tank, then okay, fine, the vulnerable stuff is right inside the armour. If you use it on something like this, then assuming that you get through the outer 1.5 inch plating without it detonating, and you do actually detonate right up against or near this 12 and a bit inch hull armour plating, yes, it will come through. And yes, it will expand, and there'll be lots of hot gases and bits of metal flying around in here, which, well, as you can see, there ain't really all that much any great import to actually damage in here. You might take out a few shelves, a bit of contraband, some cold water pipes, which will probably actually be detrimental to the whole, setting the ship on fire thing. Most of this cabling is newer, so most of that wouldn't be here in World War II. And so you'd fill this space, and maybe the space behind us, maybe the space ahead of us, with hot gases, but no one's going to be here. You're not really going to do anything to the ship's capability to fight. If it's a really long jet with a really, really powerful confined stream of molten metal, then maybe you'll hit the back hull plating here. But the chances with that much dispersion of you getting through there to affect anything particularly important further on, pretty minimal. And this is pretty much this, if you were going to try that, pretty much the sweet spot of where you'd want to try it, because of course you have the 5-inch magazines here. That's not necessarily true along the whole length of the ship. So, quite a lot of different interesting things to learn here, both about why you want to just use effectively a kinetic penetrator with an explosive charge right at the end of its travel, which is your standard armor-piercing shell, but also some idea of what the inside of a battleship's protection looks like, at least for a US fast battleship with this sloped, inclined armor belt. Obviously, a ship with a vertical exterior belt like Salem or most of the British warships will be different, but there's very, very few places you can go and see this kind of thing. Unless, of course, we went to the void on the other side. I wonder what the void acoustics are going to be like over there if we can get there. I mean, for the minute, it is the void, and now we are leaving the void. Much echo. Echo the dolphin.
That's a sprinkler. So maybe don't feel like to travel that.
Bye-bye. Hello, and welcome back to the void. Except we're now on the outer void, which is even better than the inner void, because there is more darkness here. So we are sandwiched in a very small space, and over to my left, your right, this is part of the torpedo defense system. So unlike pretty much every other metal piece on the ship, if I hit this, which has probably scared a few tour groups, that is a huge void space which is part of the torpedo defense system to absorb the blast and splinters of torpedoes. And then on this side, this is the outer face of 12 and a bit inches of US Class A face-hardened armor steel. This is part of the upper belt. There is very, very faintly there, you can maybe just make out, it says UB8S. So that stands for upper belt, plate 8, starboard side, which is where we are. So that way forward. And then down here, you can see the lower belt. So it kind of overlaps slightly and is set a little bit further back so that there's no weakness. And the whole thing, as you can probably tell, is inclined by 19 degrees. So that means an incoming shell, which would in theory be coming in this way, if this belt was flat, vertical, like so, then the incident angle would be considerably less, which would improve that shell's penetrative capabilities. But with the belt aligned like this, that adds 19 degrees to that overall inclination in the first place, which means that it's more likely that the shell might be deflected downwards and skip off. Unlikely, but possible. But more to the point, the apparent thickness of the belt is much greater than 12 inches. And because of the way that you're having to work out the angle and apparent thickness is using your basic trigonometry, sine, cosine, tangent, etc. Anyone who's gone through that kind of mathematics in high school or university will know that the greater the angle, the more effect this has. So at close range, if the shell's coming in at 5 or 6 degrees, this angle, the increased apparent thickness is not going to be all that great. But if you're fighting at medium to longer ranges and the shell's coming in steeper, the increase in apparent thickness is going to be much, much greater than just the simple increase in angle of descent might otherwise suggest. And then below us is more of the torpedo defences, so you'd open this hatch and there's even more void, which goes all the way down, almost to the bottom of the ship. So don't fall down there, because you probably aren't coming back.
And that, for the moment, is going to conclude our look round the USS New Jersey. Now, there will be at least one, possibly 2 or 3 follow-up videos to this during the year, partly from other stuff that I have managed to photograph that on the April 22 trip that I didn't manage to show you, and partly from other stuff which hopefully I will be filming at the time that this video goes out in about 5 to 6 weeks' time. Now, with all that said, here's a few little spoilers, teasers, etc. for other stuff that's in the ship. So, what else is kept down there in the deepest parts of the void? And what is the meaning of these strange scratch markings on the outside of the ship's belt armour? Is perhaps there something deeper in the ship that's desperately trying to get in? What's it like in officer country? Where aboard the USS New Jersey is the secret chamber that gives you superhuman strength so that you can one-hand 110-pound charges or just cart around a 2,700-pound shell like it weighs nothing? What exactly do you find when you go down Broadway? And spoiler alert, it's not musical numbers. How does one run a TV station aboard a battleship? What's it like inside an Iowa-class's engine and boiler rooms? And how do they work? What is the precise meaning of every single one of these dials? How do you coax a wild Ryan Szymanski out from his natural habitat? What's it like to fire a 5-inch 38 caliber gun, even if it is from several dozen feet away by a remote detonator and using a significantly reduced charge? Because apparently Windows being intact is important for some things. But in all seriousness, 2 days aboard USS New Jersey, and there's still a ton of stuff that I'm hoping to see when I go back. And speaking of going back, obviously if you are able to go and visit Battleship New Jersey, obviously that helps support the ship, please do so. If you can't, they have a ship store over at their website, battleshipnewjersey.org. Coming up in 2023, in January and February, you can go on a self-guided walk-up tour on Saturday and Sunday of each week, as well as, according to their website, on Martin Luther King Day, which is Monday, January the 16th, President's Day, Monday, February the 20th. And the ship's open from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on all of those days. And in March onwards, the battleship will be open for tours every day between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. If for some reason during January and February you want to go in midweek, it also does say they can open it up for guided tours at 12 noon when the ship isn't otherwise open, but you have to purchase those guided tours in advance online. And if you can make it to the area on Saturday, February the 11th, I will be there, along with a number of other special guests. More details to be announced very soon, but I'm very, very happy to let you know all about that. So you've got, as I say, probably about 5 or 6 weeks until then at the time that this video gets uploaded, and there will be more information available on my channel about that coming up, and of course on the Battleship New Jersey website when all of that goes live. So look forward to that, look forward to meeting you there, and many, many thanks to everyone from the Battleship New Jersey team, Ryan, Libby, Aliana and Jennifer, and all the rest of the crew who were obviously keeping the battleship running whilst I took, the entire curatorial staff off into a void space between a 12.2-inch armor belt and a bunch of torpedo protection systems, where if one of those hatches closed, it would have taken a while to find us, let's just say that.
So this has been a wonderful trip, but as you probably noticed, I'm standing in front of the camera. The camera has been tracking around and panning. AI isn't that advanced yet. So I did bring a cameraman with me. Unfortunately, it turns out I didn't pay him very well, and he's...
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.